This is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I am Rob Alvarez. I'm a consultant and founder of Professor Game and professor of gamification and game-based solutions at IE Business School, EFMD, EVS University, and other places around the world. And if this content is for you, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey engagers, and welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And you might believe it or not, and when I say the full name, but we have a very special person with us today. But James, before we get started, are you prepared to engage?
Of course.
So, here we have today with us, we were discussing this in the pre-interview chat, James Bond. James I. Bond, just in case so you don't confuse him with a spy. He is one of America's leading behavioral management specialists and the author of the award-winning book, Brain Glue: How Selling Becomes Much Easier by Making Your Ideas Sticky. For 13 years, he ran one of Southern California's leading behavioral management firms, working with a who's who of Americans' business, and early in his career, he ran an advertising agency in Montreal. He's a workshop leader and past workshop chairman for the resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration, and has been featured guest speaker at 3 Southern California universities. He's uncovered a secret to becoming rich in business that's blowing people's mind by using brain science to make it much easier to get people to say yes to your ideas and buy your products. His goal is to create 1 million millionaires by using his ingenious game system. So, James Bond, is there anything that we're missing from that intro?
No, except that people hang up on me sometimes because they think I'm kidding with my name, but no.
Amazing. So, James, we want to know you a little bit better and understand, what does it look like to be you nowadays? What does a regular day with you look like?
Besides people hanging up on me? I was telling you before, I had this friend I know whose name is Jesse James, and he's an investment banker, which is probably not the best name for a banker. Jesse James is a bank robber. But the first time I called him, I said, "Hi, is Jesse in?" And the secretary said, "Who's calling?" I said, "James Bond." She said, "Yeah, right," and hung up on me. And I called back, and she's laughing while she's apologizing. "Oh, so sorry." He doesn't sound like you're sorry, but anyway. But so I get a lot of that, but it's fun. I mean, it wasn't fun in the beginning. I was born after the books, but before the movies. My parents say it was just coincidence, but I think my parents had a sense of humor. What can I say?
Amazing. So, James, can you tell us a story of a time when you were using this amazing technique that you've created, the brain glue technique, and it actually flopped, didn't work well? You had a first attempt at learning, but maybe it was early days. I don't know. We want to be there with you, take away some of those lessons. We want to, take away everything and anything that we can from that experience. Or behavioral science in general, of course.
Okay. Well, so the book was originally called Sell More with the Right Brain Marketing Strategy. And I'm lucky enough to have Jack Canfield, who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul and the whole series. I mean, he sold 500 million books, if you can imagine. 100 million Chicken Soup for the Soul and 400 million of the Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul, Chicken Soup for the Cancer Survivor Soul, etc. So 500 million, it's 500 million books. I mean, it's amazing. He doesn't need my help. But he read my book and he got mad. He said, I have so many things to read. I started looking at your book and I couldn't put the damn thing down. He said, but, and I said, so first I'm apologizing. And then I said, well, can I use that as a testimonial? He said, on one condition. The book is called Sell More with the Right Brain Marketing Strategy, but you're telling us all to use brain glue. The whole book is about brain glue, which is, emotional selling. It's emotional words, brain glue. What's that, And I'll give you the quotes on condition that you change the title of the book. Said, you're torturing us. I'm going to torture you. So I had to change it to brain glue, which is better. And a lot of people said to me, because I'm a logical person. I mean, a lot of people who create games, they're fun, but they still come up with logical names. Not things like, think of some of those popular names like yo-yo, pickleball, hula hoop, silly putty, Super Bowl. In fact, the Super Bowl used to be called the finals, football finals or something like that. And the Super Bowl was a really popular product in the day. It was all over TV and radio and everything else. It's a ball that has an incredible bounce. You bounce it on the ground and it bounces like over your head, like really high. And so because everyone was calling it, was talking about Super Bowl, they said, why don't we change the name of this to Super Bowl? It sounds almost the same. And the rest, as they say, is history, because Super Bowl is like a monster of success. But yeah, so he forced me to change the title of the book to be more relevant, which is good, but also to trigger he said, you're teaching us right brain selling and you have a left brain title. What's that all about? Okay. And it's hard with Amazon because you want to get, like, we're almost over 100 reviews now. And all the reviews, I mean, thank you to anybody who's read the book and given me positive reviews, because the reviews are outstanding. I mean, really, it's fun to read and to get people's feedback. But I had like about 50 reviews from the previous book, and Amazon doesn't let you transfer them over. And their algorithm loves more than like 50, 100 reviews and stuff like that. And so he forced me to change it. But, that was my torture. He said, you're torturing us by getting us to become, to do more emotional selling, which makes a lot of sense. So we have to get you doing that too. It's like, okay.
Amazing. So you learned your lesson of basically applying your own technique to your work. Does that make any sense?
Well, yeah, I guess. Well, especially, I mean, here's the biggest thing. I ran an advertising agency in Montreal. We live in Southern California. We've lived here for about 32 years. We actually named our middle daughter. We gave her the initials LA, so we'd know, how long have we been in Los Angeles? Okay, how old's Lauren? But I had an advertising agency, and we worked our way up and won some of the world's biggest clients: Kraft Foods, Timex, Avon, Abbott Laboratories, Seagram's. Their world headquarters is there. And we had an opportunity to win the anti-drug campaign in America. And we came up with logical reasons why people shouldn't do drugs, and we lost. And we lost for good reason. We lost to the campaign that had a guy holding an egg saying, this is your brain. And he cracked the shell and dropped it into a sizzling frying pan. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions? And when I saw it, two things happened. The first one was I recognized that was a gazillion times more powerful than the ad we had. We had logical reasons to not use drugs, but this was emotion. It touched you deep. And it was just profound. And it also terrified me, because I know how to do logical selling. I was, logic and math and, and all that stuff. But emotional selling, I don't understand how it works. And so what I did was, I recognized that school doesn't teach you emotional selling. And so what I did was I went to the library, but they have superficial things. Nobody teaches emotional selling when it's so profound and it's such a big moneymaker, regardless of the product or the game you have or whatever else. And so I figured, the scientist in me said, I bet I could figure out how this works, but I'm going to have to do this over a long period of time. So I took a box and I put it next to my computer, and I called it the passion box. And I wrote on a 3x5 card, your brain on drugs, so I'd remember it. And I put it in the box. And then I said, anytime I come across something that's emotional selling or emotionally impactful somehow, I'm going to put it in my box, my passion box. So that went on, and I said, I'm not going to overanalyze it because I don't understand it. So I'm not going to drive myself crazy yet. Okay. I just want to create a large inventory of all these emotional selling tool phrases, etc. And then I learned things like, I'm old enough to remember President John F. Kennedy before he got assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. And Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do, ask what you can do for your country. And I went, whoa, that's powerful. My brain knew there was a pattern in there, but I didn't know what it was. Today I know it's called chiasmus, which is a flipping. It's like, when the going get tough, the tough get going. It's just a flipping of rhyme like. But I started putting those in my box. After about 10 years of doing this, I've been doing this for 35 years, so I'm old, okay? But after about 10 years, and we moved to Southern California, and just before we started our behavioral management firm, which became a blockbuster, which is really a whole other story, I met John Gray, and John Gray was telling me that he wrote a book called Men, Women, and Relationships, and it was phenomenal, one of the best relationship books ever. But he sold a few thousand copies. You can't make a living selling a few thousand copies of a book, even if you make, $1 a book or whatever. But he was telling me he was doing a seminar to try to promote the book, and he said something, and all the women in the audience laughed hysterically. And all the men looked at the women and went like, what are they laughing at? What's so funny? And then one of the women said, he started saying how It's interesting how men will laugh at certain things that women won't laugh at, and women will laugh at certain things that men won't laugh at. Now, of course, there's things that we all laugh at. And so one of the women said, it's almost like men are from a different planet. And he thought about it and he said, yeah, I guess men are from Mars. And everybody laughed, men and women.
Huh.
So when he got home, he was thinking, if men are from Mars, where are women from? Well, I guess women are from Venus. Venus is the god of love. And then he got this crazy idea. What if I change the title of my book? Because it's not selling much anyway. So what do I have to lose? What if I change it to Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? Because I know it made my audience laugh. Maybe it'll make people laugh and they'll pick up the book. And then he changed, he just put references to Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus throughout the book, because you can't write a book about Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, not reference it throughout the book. But it's the same book, okay? That's what he's telling me. It's the same book. It's just, if you put the two books together and went through them, you'd see it's the same book. And guess what happened? Okay? Almost overnight, he sold 500,000 copies, then 1 million, then 2 million, then 5 million. Guess how many books he's already sold of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? 50 million books. 50 million books. Gee,
That's
I
not
could
a bad
retire
number.
on that. How about you? A book. I want it. But I realized, all he did was change the title and suddenly his sales exploded. He went from a few thousand to 50 million. Wow, is that possible? And it made me, when I got home, I was going to put his book in my passion box, and I stopped and I said, no, this is too deep and too powerful. And so I made my bed. I don't think it was made. So I had a large surface to put stuff on, and I dumped the passion box on the bed. And I said, okay, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. What is that? That's a metaphor or analogy, okay? Because we men are not really from Mars. Well, maybe we are. I think a lot of women think we're from a different planet, but that's a whole other story. And I don't think we're really from Mars. But it's an analogy or a metaphor, okay? So what else are metaphors? And I started realizing things like Shark Tank, the TV show. It's not a tank full of sharks. It might feel like it if you're on the show, but it's not. It's if they called it the Investors Club or the Investors Show, do you think it would be as successful as Shark Tank? I don't think so. And I saw on the History Channel, they were talking about Dreyer's ice cream, that back, in the Great Depression, they invented Rocky Road ice cream. Actually, technically, one of the guys stole the name from somebody else, but that's fine. And basically, it's chocolate ice cream with nuts and marshmallows. But they said, well, it's like a Rocky Road, And they thought it was a cool name, Rocky Road ice cream. Also, it uses another brain glue tool called alliteration, which is a repetition of sounds. Rocky Road. And I started thinking of how many other products and ideas use alliteration. Coca-Cola, PayPal, Best Buy. Let's talk about all the games. Yo-yo, pickleball, hula hoop, squatty pot, silly potty. I have squatty potty because that's another product that took off like gangbusters. Hungry Hippo, Chinese checkers. You think it's a coincidence? I'm a baby boomer, that sticks to the brain because alliteration is one of the tools that sticks to the brain. It's just as cool as a cucumber, okay? Dead as a doornail. How dead is a doornail? I want to know, and yet alliteration, it sticks to the brain like glue. And then the other thing that Rocky Road uses is humor, and humor can be tremendously powerful. It triggers a chemical inside the body called oxytocin, which actually makes people more receptive to buying, believe it or not. And so Rocky Road was started during the Great Depression, and a nickname for the Great Depression was Rocky Road. We're all on a rocky road. So their concept was, well, we're all on a rocky road. We might as well eat Rocky Road ice cream. And it's funny. But, just like, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, I remember I was in a bookstore and I was looking at these different books, blah, blah, blah. And I went like, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? What? And I picked it up. If you want to get somebody to buy your product or your game, guess the first thing you have to do is get them to pick it up. Or if it's an online thing, at least read more details. And so I picked it up and then I said, I started looking through it. I said, this is great. And I ended up buying it, which is how he sold 50 million books. That's not bad.
That's amazing. And thinking about the way that you arrive to these kinds of things, and I'm not going to say you have everything figured out, but I'm sure you've broken down a big part of this process at this point, and with your understanding and all the science behind it. How do you do it? How do you arrive to something like that? Is there a process, some steps? Like, what do you do to at least get you closer to a moment like that one?
So there are 14 tools, okay? And each one of the tools I give lots of examples and have an exercise. And also, anyone who gets the book, you also get access, which most people are taking, to this book that's like a game that shows you how to apply brain glue to any of the products or ideas that you have. But so let me give you two examples, okay? I saw on Shark Tank, I'm not a big, I don't watch, I used to watch it when it started, all that stuff, but I was watching a Shark Tank show and it had Wally Amos, who created Famous Amos cookies, okay? And he was sad. He was talking, he had another product that wasn't related to Famous Amos cookies or anything else. And he was saying how, he sold it and then they sold it again. He got like some money for it. He got $1 million and they sold it for like $60 million. So he didn't get a big chunk of the big money, but still he got $1 million. But, we can burn through that pretty fast, I guess, so some people. And so he had this other product, but it wasn't related to Famous Amos. He couldn't use the picture because he said, I can't use my name or my picture on it because, they sold that, and included with the sale was the rights to Famous Amos and my picture. Okay. So he showed this other product, and people on Shark Tank really wanted to invest in him. Wally Amos, he's kind of famous. I mean, he's famous, of course, but I mean, he personally is kind of famous. But they couldn't because there was no hook to the product he was offering. And so I was thinking about this. I'm trying to reach out Wally Amos. So somebody knows Wally Amos out there, then, maybe we can make the connection. And I went, okay, so here's brain glue thinking. So we can't use Famous Amos, and we can't use his picture, okay? But his name is Wally Amos. So maybe we can have fun with his name, Wally. Oh, how about Wally Balls, which is alliteration, okay? Wally Ball sounds like volleyball. Wally Balls. And let's create cookies that are in the shape of balls. So it's a ball cookie, Wally Balls. It's a new invention, And then put a picture of him, but from the back of his head instead of the front of his head, with a note that says, I can't use my name. And on the back it says, hi, my name is Wally Amos. I created a famous cookie or cookie famous product, but I'm not allowed to show my face anymore. So you could have really fun with that. But something like Wally Balls could be tremendously successful very quickly. And I know if he came up and he said, well, I now got a new product called Wally Balls. I can't use my face, but I have got the back of my head and a note that says I'm not allowed to use my face. And then on the back, you explain why, that people would buy it. I know without a blink that the people on Shark Tank would have invested in him because it sticks to the brain like glue. I have this guy who's a baker, and he was telling me, can you help me with the name of my bakery? I think his name is Bob Johnson or something. He was going to call it Johnson's Bakery. And I said, let's use alliteration. I'm picking alliteration, but there are 14 tools, remember, okay? And I said, so why don't we can call it Big Bob's Bakery? And he said, oh, that's a great one. And we'll call it Big Bob's Bakery. It'll stick to the mind. I said, or if you really want to have fun, you can call it Bad Boys Bakery. He loved that name, and now its bakery is going to be called Bad Boys Bakery, okay? It's alliteration. So this mom says to me, okay, you're an expert in brain glue. I'm like, oh, okay. What are you going to ask me? She said, no, I've got my 14-year-old son, and he's driving me nuts because he's asking, Mommy, why do we have to follow so many rules in life? Okay. She said, how do I answer that? So I said, okay. So rules. Well, what rhymes with rules? Because rhyme is one of the tools in brain glue. Like, if the gloves don't fit, you must acquit, from O.J. Simpson's trial. Okay. I mean, he used rhyme to get O.J. Simpson off from an almost certain guilty verdict. Okay. But so this woman said, so the mom, we sat down and said, okay, so fools rhymes with rules. So we could say only fools don't follow rules. Oh, there's one. Okay. But let's make it even bigger. Let's use an analogy or a metaphor as well. And so I sat down with her and her son, and I said, so you were asking your mom, why do you have to follow so many rules in life, right? And he said, yeah. I said, well, when you're thirsty, you could drink out of the toilet, but why would you ever want to? Remember, only fools don't follow rules. And then he said to me, oh, that makes sense. Now, first of all, to get a 14-year-old to say anything makes sense is a miracle. So let's start there. I escaped before he asked me another question. But the second thing was, does it really make sense, or did I just trigger parts of the brain? So let me give you two phrases that do the same thing, okay? The first one is a political one. I guess both are kind of political. The first one is, you can't hug a child with nuclear arms. What we're doing is it's anchoring. It's anchoring two phrases together that don't normally fit together. You can't hug a child. So hug a child makes you, it's an emotional phrase. Nuclear arms could also be an emotional phrase, but they don't go together. But if you say you can't hug a child with nuclear arms, whoa, that's, it resonates. Here's another one. And I don't want to say I'm not pro or anti-gun. I don't want to get into any of this stuff, but because I'm focused on brain glue, I was fascinated by the power of this. And this comedian said, the right to bear arms is almost as crazy as the right to arm bears. Now that resonates with the brain, even though it's nuts. There's no logic to it, but it sticks to the brain. I said it to people. And I'll say, by the way, do you remember my arms one? And people, I told them it like 6 months ago, and they say, yeah, I remember it. The right to bear arms is almost as crazy as the right to arm bears. I mean, maybe it doesn't stick with everybody's brain, but it sticks with a lot of people's brain, and it resonates because it's following a pattern that's already wired into the brain. And in fact, let me give you two patterns, okay, that brain glue is based on. So the first pattern is something called redintegration, not reintegration, but redintegration, okay? And redintegration is the brain's need for completion. It's like you're watching a crappy movie or a TV show, but you have watch it to the end, okay? I went into the living room and my wife was watching a TV show and I said, hey, Pam, is this any good? And she goes, nah, it's stupid. I said, so why are you watching it? She says, I want to see how it turns out. Okay. So one of the most powerful tools, probably the most powerful tool of human interaction is what? I'm using it now, aren't I? Can you tell what I'm doing? It's questions. Yeah. Questions are powerful because our brain is wired that when we hear a question, we answer it. Okay. It's funny. I say it to a large audience because I work with the U.S. Small Business Administration. So sometimes I'll have 200 or 300 people in an audience. And I'll explain this to them that we answer questions, don't we? Are you going to keep answering my questions? What do you think? And then people will obviously stop shaking their head. I said, you're not shaking your head, but inside your head, you're still, I got you engaged, don't I? They said, yes, okay. It's really powerful because there are certain things that are wired into us. So like if you have a pattern that's wired into you, I'll give you a phrase, okay? So when you go to a department store, there's this famous guy who is an early sales trainer who is just absolutely incredible. And one of his clients was Macy's department store in the early days of Macy's. And when a sales clerk comes up to you, and one of the first things they're going to say is, may I help you? And then people often say, no, thanks, just looking, or something like that, So he trained salespeople to say, could you help me? And it just floored people. Like, what? Because they're so used to, well, may I help you? And so having a salesperson come up and say, could you help me? They would go, yeah, sure. What? Well, I'm a new salesperson and my boss is watching. So can I help you? And it just because you took this phrase and you twisted the end, suddenly, it grabs their attention. So that's redintegration. Well, here's another one, which is asymmetry. So redintegration means we like symmetry, okay? That's one of the tools of redintegration is symmetry, which is like the left. My wife looks at a guy on TV and one of his eyes is sort of drooping and it drives her nuts because she says if you cover half his face, it looks like one guy. If you cover the other half of the face, it looks like another guy. So when two sides of the face or something that you're presenting is odd enough that it stands out from the audience, then they tend to be focused on it. It works with brain glue. So let me talk about Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's initial name was Norma Jean. And I think it was her manager that said, you should call yourself Marilyn. And then her stepdad, I believe it was her stepdad, was called Monroe. So she came up with the name Marilyn Monroe. I don't think she was trying to make it alliteration, but it uses alliteration, repetition of sound, Marilyn Monroe. Then her favorite movie star back then was somebody named Jean Harlow. And Jean Harlow had platinum blonde hair. She was a blockbuster of success. And so Marilyn went to the same hairdresser that Jean Harlow went to and had her hair dyed the same color, platinum blonde. So then she said, okay, that's great. But she was looking at photographs of Jean Harlow and she noticed that in some photographs, Jean Harlow has a beauty mark or a dot, on the left side of her face. But in other photographs, she has it on her chin. And then she realized, wait a second, I bet she doesn't have a beauty mark on her face at all. I bet she's just putting a dot on her face, on one side of her face, to bring attention to herself. And so Marilyn, she used to cover up the beauty mark on her face with makeup. Instead, now she used dark eyeliner to darken it so it popped out from the crowd. It popped out and you couldn't miss it. And she believed that became one of the key reasons why she became so successful. And there are a lot of famous people that do this also. That Cindy Crawford is a supermodel. And I was reading the bio of Cindy Crawford, and just recently she was saying how when she was a kid, she has this beauty mark, this big birthmark over her left lip. And she begged her mom to get it removed. And her mom refused. And she said, I am so happy my mom didn't get the beauty mark removed because I bet that's a big part of why I became a supermodel. You know, if you see pictures of Madonna, she's got a beauty mark sometimes on the left side of her face and sometimes on the right side of her face. So she must know this also. And so that's alliteration. If something stands out, if you can make it stand out, I'm not telling everybody out there to, if you have your face, to put a dot on your face, but if you put a dot on your face, people will notice you. It's just really funny. But so brain glue uses these tools because it understands how does the brain work? What are some patterns that are stuck in the brain? And by the way, the reason asymmetry, it's called, which is like something that stands out, works, is because it's wired into us from the days of the dinosaurs and stuff. You know, we could look at a field and everything looks fine, but suddenly we notice this thing that's moving because we recognize something sneaking up on us that's got to protect us. And so these types of things are wired into our brain. In fact, the famous advertiser from the early years of advertising, David Ogilvy, did an ad for Hathaway shirts, which, by the way, Warren Buffett, one of the richest men on the planet, bought eventually. So it became massively successful. But he had it in the early days. And so if you're doing a photograph, an ad in a magazine for a shirt company, so what do? You have a good-looking guy wearing your shirt, nice pair of pants, maybe in a nice background, okay? But every shirt company has the same basic look. You know, some guy wearing a shirt and everything else. Hopefully you like the shirt. What David Ogilvy did was he put an eye patch on the guy, over just one eye, an eye patch. And he called it the Man in the Hathaway shirts. And then they would have different models, but all had an eye patch. And the eye patch became a symbol for Hathaway shirts. And it turned Hathaway shirts into a massively successful multi-million dollar company, all because of this guy that had an eye patch. Anyway, but so that's, you know, these are things that stick to the brain. And it's just the more I learned about these things, you know, starting with John Gray and Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and then, you know, Jack Canfield, who sold 500 million books. I mean, these guys, Jack Canfield was telling me, so he wrote a book with 101 motivational stories. But he didn't want to call it 101 motivational stories because that's, you know, other books are like that and everything else. And so he was struggling to come up with a name for the book. And one day he woke up and just, you know, sometimes in your dreams you get a great idea. I guess a lot of musicians do that also, and they wake up and write it down next to their bed. But he came up with the idea and he said, wait a second, chicken soup makes you feel good if you're feeling down and sick. Well, why don't I call the book Chicken Soup for the Spirit? Okay, and so he was struggling with it because I don't think I've got the full name, but I got part of the name, Chicken Soup for the Spirit. And then he realized through alliteration, now he hadn't read my book, he was kicking himself because he says, I wish I read your book earlier, because he wrote a lot of other books that he would have applied this to as well. But he said, Chicken Soup for the S-O-U-P, S-O-U-L, soul. Soul, soup, soul. It's alliteration and it works better, okay? And so he said, I changed the title, and suddenly, you know, he had to work to get people to see the book, but the book took off like gangbusters, and obviously 500 million books, that's a lot of books. But he said he's written 47 other books, and now that he's looked at the, you know, Brain Glue and he's read the book, he said, I would have renamed a bunch of my other books. He said, the book sold because I'm Jack Canfield, so people know me because I'm famous and all that stuff. But no, I think it would have taken off even more if I would have changed the title of some of my books.
And it's just amazing.
It's just because it's patterns. You know, people say, wow, you invented brain glue. And the bottom line is I didn't invent brain glue. I invented the name brain glue. That's what sticks in the brain. But it's out there. You know, we don't really, you know, Chicken Soup for the Soul. Jack Canfield used brain glue. He didn't even know he was using it. But he was like using the tools. And so now what happens is people go through this and they go through the exercises in the book with each one of the 14 areas. And they start realizing, whoa, I can, you know, you don't have to apply all 14 of them. You can often just apply one. And suddenly your product takes off. They have this couple, a mom and her son in Utah. And she's sitting in the bathroom and she goes like, I need to, you know, raise my foot, put my foot on a little stool while I'm in the bathroom because it changes the shape of the body so you can go to the bathroom better. I don't want to get too much into that. But they said, so we want to create a product, even though we've never been in business before. We want to create a product that's going to do this, and it's going to be really cool. We're not going to call it toilet stool. What would be a good name? Well, let's see. Another name for toilet is potty. Okay, so what do we do? Well, we're squatting. Squatty potty. Oh, squatty potty. What a great name. And within 2 years, they sold $100 million worth of product. Okay. This guy, Paul Tran, he made an electric razor that shaves man's private areas. Okay. And so he wanted to come up with a name that was not offensive, that wouldn't offend people, but was clear and obvious what it does. So what do you come up with? He was thinking, and this is one of the elements that you want to do analogy or metaphor is really strong. Now I'm picking these, just a few of them, so I don't overload your audience, but there are 14 of these tools, and it's amazing how they work. So he said, an electric razor that shaves man's private areas. So a funky analogy would be, it's like a lawnmower. Why don't I call my product a lawnmower? In fact, why don't I call my name of my company Manscaped? So we're landscaping a man with a lawnmower. And his sales exploded. One of the major, electric razor companies was trying to buy him. And I think he didn't sell it because he wanted more money. But he's like, and think about it, okay? So you buy this product that shaves your private areas, and it's called the lawnmower. So first you're going to laugh while you're buying it, okay? And then you're going to share it with friends, all the guys. Hey, guess what? I just bought the lawnmower, But it sticks to the brain. And if you think of, again, I'll go back to it because, a lot of your people are into games and stuff. It also could be how the way you describe the game too will really blow people's minds. But I mean, I go back to yo-yo, pickleball, hula hoop, squat, silly potty, and stuff like that. But so here's how you can use a phrase. I'm talking about how to use a phrase to help boost the sales of your product or game. Here's a way to screw your competitor. Now, I'm not suggesting any of you guys do this, okay, or gals out there. But how about this phrase? The whiter your bread, the quicker you're dead. So let me tell you how this one worked, okay? This one almost bankrupted America's top bread company. So Wonder Bread invented sliced bread, back in the early days. And they dominated the market for over 10 years because they invented white bread. And it's bleached. They bleach it so it's white. But bread used to be sold all as a single loaf, okay? And they invented the concept of sliced bread. In fact, you've probably heard the term, oh, that's almost the best thing since sliced bread. Well, they're talking about Wonder Bread, even though they may not realize it. So Wonder Bread dominated the marketplace. Even though other people started slicing their bread and everything, Wonder Bread started it and everybody bought Wonder Bread. Then they had this illness that struck America. It probably struck the world. It was called pellagra. Very similar to COVID, okay? And people were dying and they didn't know why. Then when they discovered it's because of an absence of vitamin B3. And vitamin B3 is one of the essential vitamins. Niacin is something they use to fortify bread and other products now because niacin is loaded with vitamin B3. But back then, especially Wonder Bread was bleached. And so it kills off a lot of the nutrients in there, particularly vitamin B3. And so a competitor, I think it was two competitors, they came up with this idea and they told it to the news media, back then. And suddenly it took off like gangbusters. Hey, the whiter your bread, the quicker, remember, the whiter your bread, the quicker you're dead. And people go like, what? Oh, I can't eat Wonder Bread anymore. And it almost bankrupted Wonder Bread. Eventually, Wonder Bread invented fortified food. They put niacin in it and other things in it, and then they started coming back. But never as much as they dominated the marketplace before the phrase, the whiter your bread, the quicker you're dead worked. And I was talking about O.J. Simpson. I mean, it's just, you don't realize these things, because they stick to the brain, it activates the emotion sides of the brain.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And like, as you start understanding that this actually triggers, there are two famous scientists. There's Gerald Saltman, who's a Harvard Business School professor, and Daniel Kahneman, who was a Nobel Prize winning psychologist. And they both discovered in two different areas, and they promote it and they talk about it because they discovered this, that more than 90% of decision making happens on the right side of the brain, the emotion side of the brain. That's why people love games, because games are patterns. It's a pattern. Once you learn the pattern, it's kind of fun and you're playing a game. Also, when you mix work with play, the mind defers to play. Somebody can come home exhausted and say, you want to play football? Yeah. Suddenly I have energy. But so games are awesome that way, but you want to trigger it. You want to trigger the game also with a name that resonates with brain glue.
That is amazing. I mean, engagers, if you've been listening to the past, I don't know, it's already been like 30 minutes of just pure gold coming out of James's mouth and giving us so many recommendations, so many great examples of things that have happened around the world. So, James, again, we're running out of time. I'm super excited about everything that's come up. I'm sure the engagers will find a lot of value in things that they can implement in their classrooms, in their games and their gamified strategies. So first thing first, James Bond, thank you very much for being on the podcast, giving away all of that understanding, all that knowledge. But of course, before we let you go, we need to know, where can we find out more about you, about your work, what you do? Of course, where can we find your book? And of course, any final piece of advice you want to leave us with, we're open to that as well.
Sure. Well, first, the book is the easy way to get to it on Amazon is go to braingluebook.com, and that'll take you right to Amazon so you can see. And there's free chapters you can get. There's an audiobook also. I didn't narrate. We had a fabulous narrator. He's hilarious. So you can listen to some of that too. But so Brain Glue book is an easy way to do this. But yeah, just try this. People are on the call right now. Start thinking of alliteration, crazy names for your product, or ways to describe it. And that's a good place to start, or analogy. That could really help you. But yeah, we're trying to create 1 million millionaires. You have a ton of people, quite a few people now who have actually become millionaires or are very, very successful by applying this. And I'd love to hear from you guys, because our goal is to create 1 million millionaires. That we think that once you start doing this and slightly adapt your product or game, that you can actually become a millionaire. So yeah, braingluebook.com. You can at least read some of the free stuff.
Amazing. Thank you so much again for all the value that you've been dropping on the podcast. Engagers, remember that gamification and games are based essentially on brain science. So listen to all of this advice, take what you can, implement as well what you can. And thanks again, James, for being on the podcast today. However, as you know now, and as the engagers already know as well, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey Engagers, and thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with James Bond. And if you have questions that you would like to ask future guests, please go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected, it'll certainly come up in a future episode, and you'll get that answer live on that episode. And before you go on to your next mission, before you click continue, please go ahead and subscribe or follow, whatever that looks like, on your favorite app. Do that for free and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.